So, ladies and gentlemen, today I am really proud to present to you officially now my great teacher and my guru of Ashtak Varga, and soon to be my Jamini teacher as well, because I'll be getting his Jamini courses as well, Mr. Marc Boney. Shri Marc Boney. Welcome.
Well, thank you for that usual stellar introduction, Kapiel. I appreciate it.
Oh, I'm telling you, I tell that to everybody. Like, I have been trying to study Ashtak Varga for the past 6-7 years, and I'm like, I got it. But then they have their own little rules and regulation. But then I'm like, wow, if Mark is offering this, I gotta take it. And once I took your class of Ashtak Varga, it was just like, wow. Instead of making something look so complicated, you just put the 6 boxes in, and the way it's supposed to be aligned, like a puzzle. And I'm like, that's it. So I'm like, if I got this from one class from you, I'm like, my goodness, imagine what's going to happen when I learn Jamini from you. So, and I know you have the Jamini course, and I got to tell you, I read your articles. When you sent me, and I'm reading Journal of Astrology articles, KRSchannel Raaj, and then just reading your articles, I'm like, okay, well, here's KRSchannel Raaj, here's Marc Boney. I'm like, nah, this is Marc Boney now. This is
don't go overboard. Don't go overboard here.
I'm telling you, it's remarkable. I feel like people have misconstrued what Jamini. They feel Jamini is so complicated. I don't want to learn it, but I'm like, this is so much easier and beautiful compared to even Parashara.
It has a beauty and simplicity and elegance to it at times, as I've talked about. So, we're going to be talking about today Jamini, a facet of Jamini.
Yeah.
And you may remember that when you first had me on your show, I recounted my experience of my first encounter with KRSchannel Raaj. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
Remember that? And where, he didn't even, he wanted me, I thought he wanted me to hand him the horoscope. He just wanted me to dictate my horoscope to it. He was holding it in his mind's eye. I'd given him even degrees. And, shortly thereafter, he started reeling off a series of very accurate statements about my life, right? One of which was about my educational background. He had said that, the chart suggested that I had a good all-around liberal arts education along classical lines. And then he said he studied literature. Well, I was rather blown away by this because it was just so absolutely true. I was a literature major as an undergrad. And so, immediately I started teaching with him I started learning from him after my first encounter. And of course, I was interested to know, how did he get that, right?
Exactly.
How did he derive that, along with the other quite accurate statements that he made? And it wasn't until I started studying Jamini with him that I came to know how he got that. And I came to know that a preferred method of his for identifying potentially the educational pattern was to see that from a special lagna used in Jamini that I think most people in Jyotish would have heard of, the KRSchannel lagna, right? And to see the influence of the grahas on the 5th house and the 5th lord from there, right? Now, in the birth chart, okay, putting the KRSchannel lagna in the birth chart, seeing it for there. So once I discovered this, and then when I started studying the Jamini sutras themselves, I came to understand why he used that approach. Then I saw this sutra, Kapiel, that I'm going to share here today, where I realized entirely why he said what he said. Okay, it's kind of an interesting thing. But let's back up. Of course, education is an incredibly important thing in life. And when people come to consult with astrologers, especially if they're quite young, right, they'll oftentimes want to know about, what education they pursue, of course, what profession connected to that they may want to do. These are very important things. And KRSchannel Raaj became very adept at guiding people this way. I was a witness to where he, in times where was able to do the same thing he did with me. I can't claim any sort of level of sort of proficiency with him doing it the way he did, but I have been successful with it at times using his methods. And this is what I want to kind of give people a sense and a feel for today. Right? But, I want to do, well, first of all, when we think about education in the chart, which grahas do you think we think about in particular? What would be the 2 planets most associated with
Jupiter?
Mercury, Jupiter, of course, right? So, a good Mercury in the chart, a good Jupiter in the chart, a strong, well-placed, so on and so forth. This always helps contribute to a person either getting a good education formally or even just informally, they're attracted to that sort of thing. They're well read, they learn. Mm-hmm. And KRSchannel chart is a perfect example of that. Exalted Jupiter, exalted Mercury, right?
Yeah.
And then, there's this idea of, okay, which houses most pertain to education? And you probably know there's some differencing opinion about this, right? Somebody like Dr. Raman in his books, and I think South Indian astrologers in general, they tend to want to look at the fourth house, fourth lord, right?
Yeah.
And then astrologers of North India and Kapiel Raaj tends to emphasize more the fifth house. One of the reasons is that in Parashara Hora, when you look at that chapter on the indications of the houses, it says very explicitly one of the words used for the fifth house is vidya, or knowledge, right? Yeah. And then in the section on dasha, it says in the dasha of the fifth lord, your knowledge will grow, right? So we have these statements, and that's part of what he bases ideas. But as I'll show you here in a moment, he really bases quite a bit on what you find on the Jamini Sutras. And then, we talked about the ninth house, right? Mm-hmm. In regards to higher education, certainly the ninth house relates to higher knowledge, right? Yeah. And then, one of the more obscure meanings of the second house is sacred knowledge orally transmitted. Right. I don't know if you came across that. So you have, different houses for this, but, I want to now share screen. Okay. Let me pull up a document that I want to use here. And I said, I discovered why Kapiel Raaj said what he said with regards to my chart, and I want to sort of explain what I discovered about that as a lead into my topic, if that's all right. Yeah. And first of all, people need to understand what the KRSchannel Lagna is. We find that planet in the birth chart that has the highest degrees amongst any planets in any sign, excluding Rahu and Ketu, if you're following Kapiel Raaj's method of only using 7 karakas. You see where that planet with the highest degrees is in the Navamsha, and that sign, whatever that is, can be termed the KRSchannel Lagna. Where does this term come from? It actually is more found in Parashara Hora. It doesn't appear itself in the Jamini Sutras, but, the Atma Karaka is said to be the most important of the Karakas, Jamini special Karakas, and so sometimes it's just referred to as the Karaka. And, of course, Navamsha is the most important division, so sometimes it's referred to just as the Amsha. So the Atma Karaka, or the Karaka in the Navamsha, that's how you get the word Karakamsha, right? So you got KRSchannel Lagna. Again, if you're following Kapiel Raaj's methods, you're going to use this as a Lagna in the birth chart itself, right? And so, we'll come back to this in a moment, but you'll find, there's a whole chapter in the Jamini Sutras. The title of the chapter is The Effects of Planets from the KRSchannel Lagna, okay? And you'll come to a section of that where he's talking about the effects of planets in the fifth house from the KRSchannel, right? And I'm showing some of these sutras here where it says if Mercury falls in the fifth house from KRSchannel, well, then a person will have knowledge of Mamansa. In the Indian philosophical tradition, there are said to be what's called Shad Darshanas, right? 6 main schools of philosophical thought. Mm-hmm. And that's what these sutras relate to, and it's relating a planetary graha to each of these. So if you have Mercury in the fifth house from KRSchannel, then you're likely to study Mamamsa. If you have Mars in the fifth, you'll study Nyaya, which emphasizes logic. If you have the moon there, you could be a student of Sankhya Yoga, the 2 systems talked about by Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. And if the sun is there, you could study Vedanta, right? Study the Bhagavad Gita. And this is one I found interesting. If Ketu's in the fifth house from KRSchannel, you would have knowledge of mathematics and or astronomy, astrological calculations. So this is the idea that the Ketu in the fifth could interest you in studying mathematics, and a part of that could be a mathematical science like astrology. So from this, it clearly indicates that Sage Jamini, when he wanted to see what, the idea of assessing what a person might study, subjects that they would get attracted to, he's looking at not just the fifth house, but the fifth house from KRSchannel. He's seeing what grahas are there, right? And by extension, who the Lord is and any connections they make. And so now this next sutra is the one that I came across where I began to understand why Kapiel Raaj said what he said about my chart. It simply says that if Jupiter is in the fifth house from the KRSchannel, well, under the right conditions, this person could become well-versed in a lot of different subjects. In other words, kind of have an all-around good knowledge of things. We call that a liberal arts education, right? And he uses the word sarvavid, which means, kind of knows a lot. And a person could also be a narrator and therefore also an author. Then the next sutra says after that is that this person could be a grammarian in particular, and then well-versed in Veda and Vedanga, right? In other words, you extrapolate this, they could be interested in, the spiritual traditions, not just the spiritual traditions of the Vedas, but spiritual traditions in general. But then also Vedanga, which of course Jyotish is a Vedanga, one of the limbs of the Veda, right? And so, if I can, show my chart here, can you see that okay there on the screen? Okay. So, my birth lagna is a Virgo, right? But if you see who my planet with the highest degrees is, it's my moon at 2551 of Leo, which then if you place that in the Navamsha, it goes into Scorpio, making Scorpio my KRSchannel lagna here. I'm not showing it in the North Indian style chart, I'm sorry, but if you just make Scorpio the lagna, okay?
Right.
Then, that's my KRSchannel lagna, and it's back in the birth chart. And so if you look at what happens in the fifth house from there, which would be Pisces, what do we see?
Jupiter.
We see Jupiter. And, it's not just Jupiter, it's Jupiter strong in its own sign, right?
Yeah.
And so just this alone, somebody like Kapiel Raaj could look at this and say, well, having the fifth lord in the fifth house from KRSchannel, that should indicate that a person could get a good education. And, I was very blessed. I had parents who really put a high value on education, and they sent me to the best schools money could buy, right? And even in spite of myself, because I was more interested in sports, I got a good education. But, it's also not just any old lord in that sign, it's Jupiter, right? And so it had given me a classical education. One of the sutras says that if Jupiter is influencing the fifth house, fifth lord for KRSchannel, then the person, the phrase is sampradaya siddhi, meaning whatever subject they go into, they like to sort of study the classical tradition of it. This is where Kapiel Raaj got the idea that Jupiter is the planet of classicism. Remember one of the comments he made about good education along classical lines. Yeah. Well, this is what he was seeing, right?
I want to ask you, what Saturn, if aspect on Jupiter through Jamini aspect, did he refer anything or influence of that?
Well, he said later went on to study a more technical subject, and and you'll see when I show you this one table that you've seen from Naval Singh's book, Planets and Education, that Jupiter and combination of Jupiter and Saturn can give management science. And, later on in my life, I got very involved in studying management science because I became what's called an executive coach working with business leaders. And I actually was the assistant dean of the business school at Northwestern University, in the management school there. So yes, all influences there are going to have some meaning. But obviously the dominant influence here is Jupiter, right? And of course, I've been immersed in, the Vedic tradition of knowledge for a long, long time. And of course, I'm a representative of a Vedanga, Jyotish. So my whole point about this is that, this is how he saw this is what he saw and why he said what he said. Okay. And so, when I realized this, and then, I was studying with him a lot, this I realized was his preferred method for seeing the educational pattern. But he would always use it and cross-check that using the Parashari system. That's that composite technique idea I've talked about before here, right? Okay. So if you go back to my birth chart, if you look at the influences on the fifth house and fifth lord, you'll see that Jupiter's involved again, right? Because my fifth lord becomes Saturn. Yeah. Fifth lord becomes Saturn. It's well placed in the first house. It's got some source of strength since it goes into its Mula Trikona sign in Navamsha, but then it gets aspected by a strong Jupiter. So this is confluence, right? You can see that from both directions, there was the strong influence of Jupiter on the fifth house, fifth lord both from my birth chart and from KRSchannel. And so when you're seeing confluent indications like that, that can make you feel more sure about what you're seeing and what you might be saying about it. And so, we'll pay attention to that idea as we go on here. But then, I think one of his big contributions is that he really started researching this idea because he saw the practical utility of being able to particularly, guide young people using this sort of information or knowledge. And so, he started to classify all the different subjects, right, into 3 different categories. I think you're aware of this: non-technical, semi-technical, and technical, right? Mm-hmm. And, one of his wonderful students and faculty members at his school, a guy by the name of Naval Singh, who I have a lot of respect for, wrote a book called Planets in Education. Yeah. So much is things that most all of it is what he learned from KRSchannel. And this table that I'm displaying now is one in which, that's the different subjects are classified. I just did something wrong. Different subjects are classified according to these categories of non-technical, semi-technical, and technical, as it relates to the different grahas. Now, of course, not all subjects are indicated here, right? But, a good number of them are. And if if you're, the sun, for example, relates in a totally non-technical way, more of a liberal arts subject, right? That would be political science. But as, he started moving in a more technical direction, the sun, is the graha, or the planetary indicator of things like mathematics, astronomy, even actuary. And then, on the most technical end, higher mathematics and physics. When you see the moon here, when it's mostly under the influence of natural benefics and falling in artistic rashis, well, then it's going to, give an inclination to things like the fine arts, humanities, music, dance. But on more technical end, when it's more with natural malefics and in the nakshatras and signs of natural malefics, it's going to relate more to things like chemistry, biochemistry, even the environmental science, and so forth. And, I'm not going to go in detail through this table, but you can see here that categorizing things in this way. First of all, in these 3 categories of non-technical, semi-technical, and technical. And so his idea is that the natural benefics, here we're talking about Jupiter, Venus, Mercury, the moon, are what he would call non-technical planets, and that they pertain more to things like the liberal arts subjects, such as history, such as literature, such as, sociology, anthropology, these sorts of more non-technical types of subjects, right? Mm-hmm. That the natural malefics, and here now the natural malefics take on a meaning beyond just the bad guys. Right? They're the kind of planets that it can incline a person towards pursuing highly technical subjects, such as engineering and so on. So this would be the Sun, mild malefic, and then Mars, Saturn, Rahu, and Ketu, and Mercury when it's exclusively under the influence of natural malefics. As we know, when Mercury is exclusively under the influence of natural benefics, then it's more of a natural benefic itself, right? So I found understanding these classifications and then which planets related to which subjects and gave rise to an interest in these things and the inclination of these things a very useful sort of thing. And then now what you're doing then is you're seeing these planets and the influence of them on the 5th house from the KRSchannel, both the 5th house and the 5th lord, right? Questions about that? Is it clear?
I want to ask you, so the influence of non-technical, semi-technical, and completely technical can fall under association with malefics or malefic sign or nakshatra. So for example, if let's say Mercury, Mars are conjunct in Aries, but they're in the nakshatra of Venus Bharani, it can represent like hotel management?
Well,
or is that what you mean? Or it can, if Mercury, Moon, or Mercury, Mars are in Aries and nakshatra of Kritika can signify as an accountant or...
No, here's the more general idea that I'm talking about. You've got natural benefics and you've got natural malefics. You also have the signs of benefics and the signs of malefics. You've also got the nakshatra of malefics and the nakshatra of benefics, right?
Yeah.
you're seeing the influences on the fifth house of the Kara-Kamsha as it relates to all those factors. Right? And all you're doing initially is saying, is this person going to be more inclined to pursue a technical education, or they're going to be more inclined to pursue a non-technical education, or is it going to be kind of a combination, because there's both influence, in which cases it might be semi-technical. And again, this will be clear as I kind of show some examples.
Okay, good.
Show some examples. But
yeah.
I'm just laying out some sort of general framework, Kapiel, right?
Okay.
And, he did this through his researches. For example, there was a period of time when he was getting a lot of people from the Indian Airlines coming to consult with him, right? Okay. So he got very curious about what graha most pertained and inclined a person to get involved in the airlines industry, whether it be as a pilot, which is sort of one level, or as just someone who was an airline steward or stewardess, or a mechanic who worked on airplanes.
Yeah.
And what he found was that it was Rahu. Right? So if you see the table here, under particularly technical, right, and or even semi-technical avionics, which he just puts in the semi-technical category. But then, if you're a pilot and you're deeply involved in aerospace or aeronautical engineering and so forth, Rahu's really going to play a role there. Now, you can even go to the Jamini Sutras here, and there's a hint in one of the Jamini Sutras that it's Rahu that gets a person involved in machinery or in mechanical devices, right? Yeah. So he would take a clue like that from an ancient text that didn't have much relevancy now, because none of the professions back then are the professions that exist now, but he would take that hint, right? And then he would start researching along those lines. And then when he saw consistently that, this factor came into play, well, that's when he would, use it. And Ketu, for example, for languages, both, foreign languages, if a person learns a foreign languages, but then also it comes into play when people are very involved in computer programming, right? And so he started researching along these lines, and that's how this table came to be. It was as a result.
I'm curious, how did Ketu become the Karka for languages versus Mercury?
Well, Mercury's there as well, all right? Yeah. But, you'll see, and I'm going to show you an example of this.
Okay.
Where, Ketu in the second house, in particular, even like from the birth lagna, will oftentimes, you remember the second house is the house of language, it's the house of speech, right? Ketu and Rahu always have to do with things foreign. But he saw that Ketu in particularly, and I found it to be very, very true. Mercury is sort of the planet of languages too, but not necessarily foreign languages. Mercury is just the planet of communication. It's the planet of speech, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I want to start showing some examples of what I'm talking about in terms of, how these things can be seen in terms of these different categories. I'm showing you the chart of an individual who got a degree, became an electrical engineer. Right? Mm-hmm. And first, showing the birth chart. And, one thing, if you kind of just examine the Rashi, you can see that this person is someone who loves to learn and is really inclined towards knowledge and acquisition of knowledge to begin with.
Yeah.
I don't know if you recognize the Saraswati Yoga here.
Yeah. Okay. Fifth lord of the ninth house. And especially Mercury-Venus conjunction with the aspect of Jupiter.
Aspect of Jupiter. Mercury's got directional strength. You see Jupiter's degrees. One degree of the movable Rashi makes it Vargotama, right?
Yeah.
And she she's running, by the way, or was recently running Mercury-Jupiter, and she got immersed in the study of Jyotish. This is a chart of someone who's very intensely been studying with me lately. But that aside, okay, her, when she was growing up, what she decided to pursue was a technical education, electrical engineering. So now see the chart from Kara-Kamsha Lagna. Kara-Kamsha Lagna is the second graph, second chart here, and you can see that the Kara-Kamsha Lagna is Pisces. Right? Mm-hmm. So the idea here is to see the influence of the grahas on the fifth house from there, and you can also look at the fifth lord, but particularly in the house or aspecting the house. Now, everyone viewing this presentation needs to realize that when doing Jamini, we're not using planetary aspects.
Yeah.
We're using Rashi Dristi, sign aspects. Right? So, all the planets in the dual Rashis, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces, they're all going to aspect each other. All the planets in the fixed signs are going to aspect the movable signs, except for the ones right next to them. Right? So, but what do you see in the fifth house from the KRSchannel here, just to begin with, in terms of the two planets that are occupying that?
Sun, Saturn.
Sun, Saturn, two natural malefics.
Yeah.
In the sun, we saw it related to mathematics, which, of course, if you're going to be pursuing an engineering degree, you better be pretty good at math. There's a lot of math involved. But then what other grahas, sign aspect, are aspecting onto Cancer, the fifth house from KRSchannel?
Ketu, Mars, and Rahu.
All malefics.
Yeah. All malefics, yeah.
All malefics. So this is an example of the idea of natural malefics inclining a person towards a technical engineer, which is very characteristic of what I've seen when I've examined the charts of engineers. Now, I happen to be an electrical engineer from this standpoint, and to see that kind of thing, you need to see greater subtleties. But all I'm doing is the rough cut here: technical education, semi-educational, non-technical education. That's what we're looking at. So now here's the chart of another student of mine who's actually been an airline pilot for United for decades.
Okay.
So of course, what his education was in avionics, highly technical subject. Even now, every few years, he has to upgrade and demonstrate, pass exams related to his technical know-how and skill. That's a part of his ongoing licensure as a pilot. Here's his birth chart, right? Now, if you look at just the fifth house from the birth chart, from the birth lagna, what do you see?
Rahu, Sun, Mars in the fifth house. 3 malefics.
Aspected by Saturn.
Yeah, aspected by Saturn, yeah.
All malefic influence there, but then here comes the confluence. See it from KRSchannel Rashi, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I get it. All malefics.
We're the same thing. So again, I could pick up this chart if this was a chart of an infant. I'd say this person is going to be very inclined to pursue some highly technical subject. Now, if I can go on a little tangent here, K and Rao used to like to use the Aruda Lagna, Pada Lagna, to see profession at times. KRSchannel too, right? But if you look at this chart and you see the 10th Lord, you see it in the sign of Sagittarius, which might suggest that it would have a career connected to long distance travel, but there's no way I'd be able to look at that, look at his 10th Lord and say this man's an airline pilot. Right?
Yeah.
But if you don't use exceptions and you calculate the Pada Lagna, that is, you take the Lagna Lord Venus, count to 4 houses where it goes, count 4 from there, then you come to Scorpio as the Pada Lagna, in which case Sun becomes the 10th Lord conjunct Rahu and Mars, and influenced by all those malefics. In other words, the connection to Rahu, in terms of what we know about his profession, is it's much more clear from Pada Lagna than it would be from the birth Lagna. Now, that's just that's just an aside. Did you follow what I'm saying there?
I get it. What if you would have used the Rashi aspect just from the ascendant itself? Having Rahu, Sun, Mars looking at the 10th Lord Saturn of 9 of the sign.
If you were doing Jamini, if you were doing Jamini, well, then I was talking about just seeing it from the Parash point of view.
Oh, just Parash point of view. Okay.
I guess I didn't make that clear. But
I thought you were still on the Jamini. Okay.
No, I'm sorry. I kind of switched you up there. I was just saying that. Anyway, it does show up in Jamini from both perspectives. Yeah. From both perspectives, it shows up. So these were 2 examples of people essentially in pursuit of highly technical, but going back to that first Rashi, later on, this person got an MBA. Okay. And now I want to bring in a different element. There's the static potential that is shown, and we're looking at the static potential from the 5th house from KRSchannel Lagna. But of course, then when a person runs different charadashas, right, the idea to see about what could happen educationally for them is to see these patterns dynamically, meaning using whatever charadasha they're running as if it's the 1st house, seeing the 5th house from there, right?
Yeah.
Well, when this person was running her Sagittarius, well, who represents, management, and it's Jupiter is one of the planets given in that table, for example, right? So the idea of becoming a master's in business administration, that most relates to the Graha of Jupiter, okay? And according to Kapiel Raaj, things like banking and financial consultants, same idea. So you see here that if you use the period when she got her MBA, if you use Sagittarius as the Lagna, in the 5th house from there was Jupiter.
Okay.
People study different things at different times.
Different times, yeah.
Right? They get interested in different subjects, or they may pursue a degree in one thing and later on, pursue a higher, some might go to undergrad, be a literature major, and then go to law school, right? How do you see that sort of thing dynamically? And what I'm saying about that is you see it through the dasha. And one of the ways to look at that is the 5th house, 5th lord. And here's what I suggest that you do. You're in a period, Sagittarius period, Kapiel, in which you've been, studying constantly, right?
Yeah.
Well, after this program, think about all the influences on the 5th house and the 5th lord in your chart from Sagittarius.
Oh, yeah, I get it. Yeah. Yeah.
And I could have predicted that you would have authored during this period. Because
yes, of course. 6 books, 7 books.
Right. Prolifically.
Yeah.
And this is all extremely, you could have seen this if you knew the appropriate Jamini Sutras, you could have seen this at a glance with regards to your Sagittarius period.
Wow.
Well, this is what I mean about the elegant simplicity at times of Jamini, right?
Yeah.
So going on here, now I want to kind of look at the other side of here, where it's the preponderance of natural benefics on the 5th house, 5th lord from here. So here we have another chart that, again, there's a strong indication that this person would be very inclined towards learning, have a love of learning, pretty high value on education. And you see here again Saraswati Yoga, right?
Yeah.
And, it's not the strongest Saraswati Yoga because Jupiter is in its debilitation sign, but still, Jupiter gets directional strength in the 1st house.
Yeah.
It helps offset that some, right? Venus is actually Vargotami here, so it has strength from that standpoint. But what I want to show you now is KRSchannel Lagna.
Oh, okay.
Influence of 4 grahas, but 3 grahas in the 5th house from KRSchannel, natural benefics. Right?
Yeah.
And actually, the 5th lord is conjunct Ketu. She knows 4 languages.
Oh, that's right. That's right. 5th lord is conjunct. So did she also? So she must have done classical languages, arts, music, and other.
Well, actually, she's a highly educated person. All right, she has a graduate, an undergraduate degree, graduate degree. She actually, very much oriented towards languages, and it's actually a teacher has started. She earns her living by having language schools. Right? And then, in recent history, and what I was pointing out, because I haven't done anything dynamically yet, when she ran her Virgo period. Okay, remember the Lagna, the birth Lagna is Capricorn.
Yeah.
When she ran her Virgo period, where we have the influence of 4 grahas, 3 natural benefics in the 5th house in there, this is when she got all her education. Very predictable from that standpoint.
Yeah.
And of course, these are combinations for authorship as well. Jamini Sutra says that the moon and Jupiter fall in the 5th house or influence the 5th house from KRSchannel. One can be a successful author. If there's the additional influences of Venus or Mercury, then that's all the better. That's what's happening dynamically for you from Sagittarius.
Yeah.
So, and this is why she's a student of mine as well, very serious student of Jyotish. This is why I've asked her to consider authoring. I think she could do well in this.
Oh my God, yes.
So this is where guidance could come in.
I mean, this is so precise. Like literally from the week that Sagittarius period started, I started writing books. Just after when I timed it, I'm like, oh my God.
You see it.
It's like,
wow. See, this was a discovery of mine, and actually not something came out told me. It's just something I discovered. Wow. All these combinations in the Jamini Sutras, they can be applied dynamically, meaning all the yogas that he gives, combinations that give a certain effect from falling from such and such a house from Karakamsha Lagna, if you apply those dynamically, and what I mean by that is when you're running a particular dasha and that yoga applies, right, you'll see that result.
Wow. Okay.
You hear what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So now we have another example. I gave you two examples of more of the technical orientation. And here you have to kind of sort things out a little bit because, first of all, I'm just showing this chart from the Karakamsha Lagna. I meant to show both the birth Lagna. But the birth Lagna is Taurus. You see where it says ascendant there?
Yeah.
And
okay.
Saraswati Yoga again. Jupiter in the second, Vargotama, Mercury and Venus in the 10th. From the birth Lagna I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
So again, just seeing that tells us that this person is, again, very knowledge-oriented, values knowledge, which they do. They've been an eternal student. But now I'm showing you the chart now from Karakamsha Lagna, right?
Yeah.
And here you see a strong fifth house in there because it contains Mars. But who else aspects onto that?
Venus, Mercury.
Right. And this is where cross-checking helps. If you use Taurus as a Lagna, who's the fifth lord?
Mercury.
Who's it with?
Venus.
Where's the confluence? Both Mercury and Venus are influencing the fifth house in the birth Lagna. And so what happened? And here's Ketu in the second. When she ran her Jupiter Mahadashas, when she went to college, she was a French language major.
Wow.
Studied French literature, but then graphic design. Think about that. Mercury, Venus, graphic design. And because it falls in the 10th house in the birth chart, she actually then became a graphic designer professionally. Right? But it can be seen both in terms of the influence of Mercury and Jupiter, both on the fifth house, fifth lord from the birth Lagna, but then the confluence from Karakamsha Lagna. You see? This is what Kapiel Raaj does. He's much better at it than I am. But I've become okay at it, right? But you talk to me, Mark, how do we evaluate educational patterns, right? Now, there's a lot of approaches to it. This
is why I'm so glad I brought it, because now it's like my brain is already working. I'm looking at other charts in my head and I'm like, oh my God.
Well, you'll see that it's a powerful method. Now, will it work 100%? No, unfortunately, no technique in Jyotish does. But you'll see a high percentage of cases, this is very valuable. Mm-hmm. Now we're going to go to another example where you've got semi-technical. If you went back to the table that I showed you, right, you would see that he put psychology in the semi-technical sort of thing, because, it's got a humanistic side to it, but it's got a technical side to it, particularly statistics, experimental design, these sorts of things. And then management science as well. It's got its quantitative methods, but then, basically it's all about people and people management. So it's a semi-technical subject. This is the chart of my closest friend from my university days. And you see his Lagna is Cancer, right? But then if you see his Karakamsha Lagna, you'll see something that looks not too dissimilar from my own, only there's more to it in his case.
Yeah.
First of all, you see Jupiter, Swakshetra, and its own sign there again, right, from the Karakamsha. But now it's in the mutual glance with an exalted Mercury.
Mm-hmm.
But also two malefics, technical planets, right, Saturn and Sun again. So his was a semi-technical. He got an undergraduate degree in psychology and then got a PhD in clinical psychology.
Ah, okay.
And has been a management consultant.
Wow.
Now you're
any
not
inspiration for Jyotish?
You're not realizing it, Kapiel, but you've seen this chart.
Really?
You've seen this chart from my article, Elegant Simplicity.
Oh.
This was the friend of mine who's positioned the director of human resource position for the $1 billion company.
Okay. That's yes. Now I remember.
And because for our viewers here, I'll just quickly see this. About over a year ago, this friend of mine said he had been invited to apply for a really big position as the top human resource professional of a $1 billion corporation. He had been consulting to the corporation for a long time. And of course, he wanted to know what his astrologer friend, the Jyotishi, thought about his chances for getting it. He didn't think they were very good because he didn't have a lot of the background that you would normally look for
Mm-hmm.
in that. Well, first thing I said is, what Charadasha is this man running?
Yeah.
And I found it was Virgo. So C Karaka is in Virgo. First thing I saw was that the AMK, the career indicator, is in Virgo in his Rashi chart, right? And it makes a mutual glance with the AK, forming what's called a very powerful AK-AMK Raj Yoga.
Raj Yoga.
Both planets dignified. And then there's the PK Mercury, more Raja Yoga. So I said, well, when will they make a decision? Because I wanted to see what the subperiod might be. And he told me it was Sagittarius, from where all those planets would go to the 10th house. If you use Sagittarius as a lagna, the 10th house from there becomes Virgo, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, it would be the period and subperiod, one major period containing the AMK, the subperiod would be from where the AMK fell into the 10th. And so I immediately told him, I didn't look at anything else, didn't even look at Vimshotri, didn't even look at it from the Parashari point of view. I said, Dan, I think you're going to get it. And, you know, the usual custom is that you give the Jyotishi 10% of your first year's salary. Well, he wasn't going for that. Right? So we agreed upon dinner, and he bought me a nice dinner last December because he got the position in October, as I predicted.
So you used Jamini, like Mahadasha, Jamini Antradasha, and did you went to the sub period of Jamini, like Maha Antra Paryantra of Jamini?
Yes, but you know, we're trying to keep things relatively simple.
Relatively simple. So Maha and Antra.
But actually, all I needed was the Maha and Antar.
Antar, okay.
Yeah, it's because, you know, in Jamini, the periods can be a lot shorter. The longest Mahadasha is 12 years.
Yeah.
Which means the longest sub-period is going to be 1 year.
Yeah.
And if it's a 6-year period, then it's going to be 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, you know, can you and should you, if you're trying to do fine timing, use a sub-period? And Kapiel Raaj talks about this in his book, particularly his book on advanced Jamini. Yes. But really, I made the prediction. It took me all of about 10 seconds. And I did just based on, and I'm not, I maybe sound like I'm boasting or something. I'm trying to bring across.
No, you're trying to show how simple and beautiful it is.
That's what I'm trying to show. You know, and now, is it always the case? No. But sometimes it is. In this case, it was, you know, it just was. All right. So going on here, now, you know, I wanted to show this chart because this is a chart of individual who is like, studies so many different things, has in his life been inclined to study so many different things, and very seriously, to the point where, you know, gets certifications, gets examinations and so forth. And so you see that the birth lagna is Sagittarius, right? And he does have an exalted fifth lord. Okay.
Yeah.
Does have an exalted sixth lord, but now see all the influences on the fifth house from the Karakamsha. Again, we're using Rashi Drishti, right?
Yeah.
Kamsha Lagna is Virgo. Who do you see? You know, we have Mars and Rahu, two natural malefics, but one very strong in the fifth house, right? But all the grahas in Taurus aspect, as does Jupiter.
Yeah.
Only 2 grahas in the entire chart are not aspecting the fifth house from the Karakamsha Lagna.
Right. Now,
he did get a undergraduate degree in electronics and telecommunications, and then he has a master's degree in electrical engineering. Highly technical education, but, you know, he's studied all kinds of things. I tried to make a list here. He studied finance and portfolio management, which is Jupiter, and he became a chartered financial analyst, passed the exam. Sun is actuary. He became an actuarial person who passed 3 professional exams.
What does actuarial mean?
Sun. An actuarial is someone who works for insurance companies and they calculate risk, right?
Jesus.
Anyway, but then, you know, Jupiter again, he's a deep student of the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita, and is currently a student of mine in Jyotish, Vedanga.
Excuse you. Okay, I want to ask you then, what gives a person this obsession towards always wanting to study? Is it an obsessive thing, or is it an actual these placement of planets that you just saw?
it's a karma samskara. We come in with certain inclinations, right? Right? We're all born with karma samskaras that then activate in our life. Karma samskaras means impressions that are stored in our subtle body that then incline us in certain ways, when we're embodied in this lifetime. Right? Now, the fifth house, fifth lord, is one of the best and deepest samskara is indicated by that. You see an exalted fifth lord here, right?
Yeah.
But, the way I would see that, if I looked at this chart and I examined his fifth house and fifth lord from the KRSchannel, I'd say, this person is someone who likes to study a lot of different subjects. He has a very powerfully aspected, now trying to figure out which ones he pursued, although I think the technical planets are stronger here, right, and they kind of outweigh. So I might have indicated that you're probably, but I would have said that you've studied both technical and non-technical subjects, and you've studied a lot of them, which,
wow, Mark, you are just a beautiful teacher. I'm telling you, it just comes to you in one class. I have risen.
Well, it's all actually, the credit goes all to KRSchannel. I'm like KRSchannel's spokesperson. I just teach what he taught me. And so now, what about if there's no planets in the fifth house from KRSchannel? Well, of course, then where do you go? You go to the Lord. So this person's lagna is Virgo, as you can see, but KRSchannel lagna becomes Pisces. Okay? And you'll notice that from Pisces, the fifth house becomes Cancer, right? And then you come back to the moon. How many planets are the moons interacting with here?
5.
Yes.
And then
6.
there is influence of 2 planets upon the fifth house.
So she's a highly educated person, number one. But then you have to see, what are the strong, what's interesting here, what are the strongest grahas here? And you're not seeing degrees, but you see Venus exalted, right?
Yeah.
Jupiter getting directional strength in the first house.
Yeah.
Moon Vargotama. Saraswati Yoga from the birth chart. All these planets in the signs of benefics. So it would have to tell you that even though there are natural malefics involved, the real tilt is towards non-technical subjects, artistic subjects. The 2 artistic planets in particular, Moon and Venus. Okay? And Venus is the strongest component of the Saraswati Yoga. She got a degree in violin performance and then a master's in literature. Jupiter, again, Venus.
Wow, but then all these technical planets from KRSchannel are also looking at the fifth house. And then
this is what I'm telling you, though. Those nodes are in the signs of malefic and signs of benefics with benefics.
Benefics, okay.
They're in the signs of benefics with benefics. They take on much more of that coloration. Now, this is more of a fine sort of distinction, okay? More of a fine, but then also, who are the strongest planets? Jupiter with directional strength. Confirmation from the Parashari point of view, Saraswati Yoga, right?
Yeah.
She's been all about music and musical education. She's a professor in the music school at a very fine university. She's a performer. She's been all about musical education, of which there is a technical aspect to.
Would you see that from the birth chart, like the musical education and?
If I looked at it, again, I'm practicing the composite technique. I'm not just looking at it from Parashari, I'm looking at it from Jamini. I'm not just looking at it from Jamini, I'm looking at it from Parashari, and I'm looking for confluence. And what's confluent here is just what I've been talking about. But I'm using this chart mostly as an example of what if there are no planets in or aspecting the fifth house from KRSchannel. What do you do then, right? And what you do then is you examine the Lord. Okay. So, of course, I can't talk about this subject without looking at the chart of KRSchannel.
Exactly.
And first of all, see how from the birth lagna, his fifth lord becomes under the influence of Jupiter.
Mm-hmm.
Because it falls in Jupiter's sign, and then you get back to the exalted Jupiter involved in Gajikesari Yoga, Hamsa Yoga, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
And then from Karakamsha, Lagna, which becomes Leo, we see something similar. The fifth house becomes Sagittarius, ruled by Jupiter. But what other grahas aspect the fifth house from there?
Sun, Mercury, Ketu, and Rahu.
Who's the strongest?
Mercury.
He was an accountant general.
Yeah.
Right? And a government one, Sun.
Wow. Yeah.
He was he is a fabulous Jyotishi as well. So what I've showed you here is more from the static potential. Right? I don't know how we're doing on time-wise, but I'd like to show just a little bit more.
No, absolutely no. I had some questions.
Sure, of course.
Besides education, what else can we use Karakamsha Lagna for?
All events.
All events, like career, marriage.
So, we have to understand that in the Jamini system, this is the preferred Lagna.
Okay.
That's the first thing you have to understand. If you look at the Jamini Sutras, or at least that portion of them that we have, okay, by far and away, the chapter with the most sutras is the second chapter, or the second part of the second pada, first chapter, entitled The Effects of Grahas from Karakamsha Lagna. In which case, he gives, I believe, don't quote me, but I think it's like 128 sutras. And he is showing different combinations. Now, again, what I've discovered is that those combinations work from any Lagna. But again, if you're doing Jamini, this is this and Pada Lagna, sometimes referred to as Aruda Lagna, are the two Lagnas that are used extensively. There are others, right? Katika Lagna, Hora Lagna, Bhava Lagna, and so on and so forth. There are others. It gets complex, but these are the two that are utilized the most. And particularly Karakamsha Lagna, and so you could be utilized to see any event theoretically. And if you looked at those sutras, it goes systematically when things fall in the fourth house from Karakamsha, the seventh house from Karakamsha, the ninth house from Karakamsha. He's giving all different types of combinations related to grahas falling from different houses from Karakamsha Lagna. He gives combinations for, my article, Ketu and Kaivalya, is about the combinations he gives for spiritual enlightenment, looking at the influences on the 12th house and the 12th Lord from the Karakamsha Lagna. Right? And so you asked my question, what other sort of events can we see from Karakamsha? And the idea is potentially we can look at any sort of event.
Is it true that Jamini Sutra also says that you also look at fifth house for career as well? A person.
No, I've never come across that.
But okay. I've read certain articles from astrologers. I was just wanted to clarify that.
Well, in the Jamini Sutras that I'm looking at, I've never came across anything about seeing profession.
Okay.
But career and profession, not always, but are sometimes connected. You have to go to law school to practice law.
Yeah.
You have to go to medical school to practice medicine, right?
Yeah.
You have to pass the CPA and study accountancy to be a certified public accountant.
I wanted to ask you for the medical school, which planets does Jamini specify, like education, medicine? Like I'm sure Jupiter, biology.
There's no planet of medicine, all right? He gives some combinations that make you a dispenser of medicines. Okay. And actually, Sri Rao wrote an article once called something like Rahu Drugs the Moon. It was about a combination in the Jamini Sutras where someone who becomes the dispensers of medicines, which are actually forms of poison, think about chemotherapy, right? There's oftentimes can be a moon Rahu conjunction involved, and I've seen some examples of that. I know a psychiatrist friend of mine who's always dispensing medicines who has this combination. It doesn't. It has to happen for a certain context and all that sort of thing. So there's no easy answer to that, Kapiel, right? But in very invariably, when you see someone become a doctor, which requires an enormous amount of education, right? You'll see, good factors with regards to the things we're talking about, and Raja Yoga factors related to that. That's something we haven't discussed yet. When these planets in the fifth form good yogas, right, then that indicates, the success in education, or can indicate the success in education. Right?
Now, I know we were talking on the phone and I asked you the question, in KRSchannel Lagna, will you use the ninth house for postgrad education? And then you're like, no, we only stick to the fifth house. So what would the ninth house be used for to study in KRSchannel?
Well, first of all, I'm not discounting the idea that the ninth house pertains to higher education, right? Okay. Certainly when looking at a chart from a Parashari point of view, based on my own researches and what I've observed, that's a very valid sort of thing. I'm just saying that now there's in terms of acquiring spiritual knowledge and a guru, there are sutras that relate to the ninth house from KRSchannel, right?
Okay.
As one might naturally suppose.
Yeah.
But if you're asking me, am I aware of any reference of the ninth house relating to higher education in the Jamini Sutras, my answer would have to be no.
Okay.
All right. So, what I wanted to do now is, because I was telling you how, you study different subjects at different times, or feel attracted to that at different times, and that can be indicated by seeing what is happening to the fifth house, fifth lord from a particular charadasha. Because remember, one of the primary techniques of using charadasha is to use it as a lagna, right?
Right, yeah.
We refer to that as dasha lagna. So, and again, if you don't mind, I'm just going to pull up my own chart because it's easy, because it's the life that I know the most, right?
Yeah.
Let me just pull this up, and I'll illustrate what I'm talking about. So, when I was in grade school, or had started grade school. By the way, I was sent to a private Catholic school, right, where I was given a very religious education. We studied the Bible. We went to Mass every day. I was kind of inculcated with stories from the Bible. And so I was getting a very religious education, right? Well, a lot of this was happening in my Scorpio period. And you can see what happens to the fifth house from Scorpio. It duplicates. So I was getting a religious education besides getting an all-round education, right? Which is part of those years. And then it also shows that it's a favorable time for me educationally. I'm likely to be succeeding because the fifth house becomes good from there, right? So now what comes after Scorpio? Sagittarius. What happens to the fifth house from Sagittarius?
Oh, it becomes the Sun, Mars, Mercury come from the fifth house, which is more technical education.
Well, but also then it's again the fifth lord in the fifth house, same fifth lord in its own house from there.
Yeah.
And you've got, the exalted sun, and there's a good Raja Yoga that gets formed here, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go into that. But then, I finish high in my class in high school, and I get into a very good university, right? So this is what was going on in the Sagittarius year, and I get attracted to studying more technical subjects, right, during that time. But then my last 2 years, I move into my Capricorn period. What do we see then? What happened? Again, the Lord of the fifth house in the fifth house.
Fifth house. Wow. Man, you got a powerful chart there.
Well, I ran favorable periods for education at the right time of life. That was, my good karma. Yeah. But a lot of it, I thank my parents for that, because they were paying for all this. Right?
Yeah.
But now what I want to do is I want to keep us in mind, Venus, strong in its own sign, unblemished in the fifth house from Capricorn. I'm running this period, right? Now I'm going to pull up the document again. And you see this document where the sutra says, Venus alone in the fifth house from KRSchannel, a poet.
Yeah.
You see that? Well, my last 2 years, I decided that what I was going to major in was English literature. And during that time, I was reading all the great poetry of the world.
Your dad must have been mad. It's like, Mark, my money's going here.
My father wasn't mad. My mother wasn't happy. Especially when she saw that I started taking courses in Buddhism as well.
Oh, yeah, that one.
But, when I saw this, when I first was reading the Jamini Sutras, I was just fascinated by this. Now, I'm not, I've written some poetry, but I'm not, particularly a poet. But during that period, I was immersed in poetry. I mean, I was writing about it, I was reading it, I was being tested on it. This is what I mean by these combinations given in the Jamini Sutras don't just apply from KRSchannel Lagna or just any Lagna particularly. They play themselves out dynamically as well.
Yeah.
Okay? So now come to my Pisces period. Jupiter, 5th house from KRSchannel Lagna. It's also the PK of my chart. That Karaka relates to the 5th house.
Yeah.
I go back to the school and I get a master's degree in counseling psychology. Jupiter. You see?
Wait, you run into your which Charadasha?
I was running Pisces.
Yeah.
It's the 5th house from my KRSchannel Lagna.
Your KRSchannel Lagna is Scorpio. Okay, you're back to that. Okay, I see.
It's the 5th house from there.
Yeah.
It contains Jupiter. Jupiter's my PK. It's involved in the Jamini Raja Yoga, so I get a master in counseling there. But now think of the subject matter. Look at the 5th house, 5th lord from Pisces. Where does it go? And what are the grahas?
With Ketu, so foreign languages perhaps.
5th lord in the 6th, moon, Ketu, aspected by 2 malefics. I'm studying psychopathology.
Psychopath, okay. Oh, I didn't see the malefic influence. Yeah.
5th lord in the 6th, it's the moon. Now, keep in mind it's the moon, right? Our psychology. Under the influence of Rahu Ketu, also additional natural malefics, I'm studying about anxiety disorders, psychotic disorders. I'm in graduate school in psychology. And
Did you ever go to any asylums or jails to do any?
No, I worked in a clinic. I worked as a psychotherapist in a clinic in 2 years as a practitioner when I got this degree. And I ran into all these women with anxiety disorders, which is what can happen when you have moon with Ketu in the 12th house.
Oh, yeah.
But then now come to the next period. What comes
I want to ask you quickly, anything to do with languages though, due to that Ketu thing you were talking about?
Well, just a lot of terminology that related to psychopathology. I wasn't, it's not necessarily a combination.
It was foreign to you in a sense.
I don't know that that's the way it manifested, but what I'm trying to point out is the fact that I might be studying psychopathology or psychology during my Jupiter, during the Pisces period, is indicated by all these things that I'm seeing. I'm just seeing the 5th house, 5th lord from the particular Charadasha I'm running and how it unfolded my educational pattern. That's what I'm trying to show.
Okay.
Now the best of all, come to Aries. Use Aries as a Lagna. What happens to the 5th house, 5th lord from there? Just use Aries as a Lagna. What happens to the 5th lord from there?
5th lord is exalted.
5th lord becomes exalted from there. It also aspects onto the 5th.
Aspects onto the 5th house, yeah. It's
with Mars, and then the moon and Mercury here form a Kapiel Raaj yoga.
Okay.
So what happens? This is, and it's a lot of technical influences, right?
Yeah.
A lot of technical influence. What happens? I meet K and Rao. I just become completely immersed in the study of Jyotish for this 12-year period.
Wow.
Become more of a student than I'd ever been in my life. So, and Ketu in the 5th. Remember that?
Oh, yes. I was just thinking about that. Okay, Jyotish, was it Jupiter or Ketu? But yeah, Ketu, yeah. Yep.
Ketu in the 5th from there. I don't have it from the KRSchannel Lagna. It's not a static potential, but it was during this time with Ketu in the 5th from the major period that I was deeply immersed in the study of Jyotish.
Your moon and Ketu are literally exactly conjunct in the 12th house.
I know. Don't you feel sorry for me?
No, your intuition is so high. No wonder you're such great. And then Rahu asks, well, according to the aspects that I use, Rahu looks at the 2nd house, gives you great predictive energy. Like whatever you say will just become true.
I always compare myself to K and Rao. When I compare myself to K and Rao, I feel like a beginner. But so anyway, this is what I had to share with you and your audience tonight, Kapiel.
Oh my God, this is the best lesson on Jamini to date I got. I mean, you just, wow, Mark, you are an awesome teacher. This is just.
Well, let me mention that for those who might be interested in learning,
yes,
the K and Rao approach to Jamini, because that's what I teach, the K and Rao approach, starting Saturday, February 4th, I'll be teaching an 8-week course entitled The Essentials of Maharishi Jamini's Upadesha Sutras, in which I'll be teaching all the core concepts of Jamini. I'll also be sharing an original translation and commentary on certain portions of the Jamini Sutras. Actually, students would receive 300 pages of written material. This is essentially a book that I've written.
Okay.
And, it's going to be delivered through video presentations, weekly video presentations that people get, written material, and also webinars, online web. Combination of those. If people want to know the details, they can just visit my website, which is www.marcboney.com. Marc is with a C. You'll see it advertised on the front page. They can just click into that and know all the details about it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Marc, for coming and just making Jamini look beautiful instead of complicated, as I thought it was going to be. But no, it is beautiful and simple.
It can be at times, and as you can see, it's a favorite subject of mine. I get very enthused when I talk about Jamini.
So simple and beautiful. I'm telling you, I'm just like, I'm feeling, I'm like, oh, so emotional right now. Like, it just makes you like that. You just get it.
But like all Jyotish, sometimes you can look at things from the Jamini angle and be just as confused as otherwise. But it has an, like I wrote an article, as you know, called Elegant Simplicity.
Yeah.
And it was an article about Charadasha and the way in which events sometimes come out in a very elegant, simple way, like I showed you the one prediction about my friend. Mm-hmm. And that's what I love about the Jamini system.
Exactly.
So to you and your audience, namaste.
Thank you. Namaste, Guruji. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.